Haverford winters have a way of telling the truth. The cold doesn't negotiate, it just draws a line and dares you to cross it. I was standing on my daughter's porch, frost smoky under my boots, when she drew hers. "Get off my property, Dad. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police." Her voice didn't crack. That almost made it worse. Chloe's always been steady braces, honor roll. The kid who knew how to balance a checkbook at 10 because I made it a game. Now she held the door frame like it was a witness. Behind her, a brand new flat screen. I know they didn't pay cash for. Flashed a game show jackpot. Fitting. I didn't argue. I'm done arguing with a narcissist's narrative. Brandon, her husband, had already texted me that morning. "Brandon, stop harassing my wife. Brandon, any more fake statements and I file for a restraining order. Brandon, you're not part of our finances." I scrolled back and looked at the screenshot I'd sent him, his business line with a lender I actually know as a backdoor for high-interest cash tied to property. The email confirmation sat right under it. Timestamp 2:14 a.m. Subject line: Second mortgage, digital signature received. It wasn't my first rodeo with men who weaponize charm and debt. I opened my red binder. Yeah, the literal red one, and held it at waist level so Chloe could see the tab. Co-applicant. Mortgage 2021. My name and hers, side by side, on the application. Joint and several liability. The kind of phrase you don't feel until someone tries to make your 30 years of discipline their weekend money. "Chloe," I said, keeping my voice even, "I'm not here to judge your marriage. I'm here because your house is collateral for a sports betting habit, and I'm on the hook. There's a second mortgage, a HELOC application, and 3 credit pulls in the last 90 days. I have written evidence." She flinched like I'd thrown something. "Brandon showed me your evidence. You pulled our bank accounts without permission. That's toxic, Dad. He said you're trying to control me. Free doing lifely. Has then being by their problems to appendix. That's how gaslighting works. It takes your boundary and calls it abuse. For the record, the bank called me because I'm listed as co-applicant. Paper has a memory. It remembered me when she chose not to." I set the binder down on the railing, flipped to the signature page. The ink, a little faded, but there. "This isn't control. It's accountability. We signed this together. You asked me to co-sign when Brandon's income history looked like a roller coaster. I said yes because I believed you'd protect the house." Her mouth flattened. "We're protecting it. You're the one trying to take it. Brandon says you've always hated him. You're an enabler of your own control issues. This is our life. Has you a..." It landed like a script someone handed her. I could almost see the bullet points. "He's jealous. He's old-fashioned. He's abusive with money. Narcissists make everything a mirror. If you won't reflect them back, they'll paint you as the problem." "Okay," I said. I closed the binder gently, like a book I knew by heart. "Call the police if you need to. But before I step off this porch, put this in your phone. Co-applicant. Then add security interest, second mortgage, and default notice. If you think I'm bluffing, check your email for the lender's disclosure. It's addressed to both borrowers." Her finger hovered near the screen. She didn't look. And maybe that was the clearest signal I needed. It's not ignorance when the link is right there. It's denial. My phone buzzed again, this time an email from our old family attorney about the will I updated after your mother passed. Not what I came to talk about, but the subject line felt like a bell. Estate planning, real property addendum. When you deal with people who ignore boundaries, you learn to stack your safeguards. "Last chance," I said softly. "Read the documents with me. I'll walk you through the interest. I'll help you set real boundaries with Brandon. We can move the house to a trust to protect it." Her eyes went glassy, then hard. "Leave, Mark." She never calls me Mark. There it was the line. Not the police part, the part where she erased me as father and promoted me to threat. That's how you get people to doubt their own eyes. Rename them. I smiled. Not because I was happy, because I finally recognized my role in this mess. I was the enabler. I'd cushioned every fall, padded every consequence. Let family be the excuse for sloppy math and sloppier character. I taught Chloe compound interest and forgot to teach her compound consequences. "Okay," I said, and stepped back into the cold. "I'm done feeling guilty. I'm done enabling. I'm going to protect what I'm responsible for." "From who?" she shot back. "From anyone who treats love like leverage." The door shut. Not a slam, just a dull, polite click. I tucked the red binder under my arm, thumbed open my notes app, and typed 3 lines. Boundary. Stop engaging on emotion. Act on paper. Status. Co-applicant. Written evidence attached. Next. Call Ava Delgado. Realtor second. Lawyer first. Brandon texted again as I hit the sidewalk. Brandon. You walk away or I make this legal. I laughed, short and clean in the cold. Good. Make it legal. That's where I live. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and walked to my truck. The frost bit through my gloves, and for once I let the cold do its job. Draw the line. Make it simple. Families can be complicated. Paper isn't. When you've spent your life building foundations, you start believing anything can be fixed. If you just tighten the bolts, that's what I told myself, driving back from Chloe's house that night, until I set the red binder down on my kitchen table and realized the rot wasn't in the structure. It was in the people I'd built it for. The house was silent except for the hum of the furnace. I poured myself black coffee, the way I used to on overnight job sites, and opened the binder. The paper smelled faintly like toner and old effort. Mortgage documents, insurance forms, pay stubs every page. A receipt for the years I traded sleep for stability. Page by page, the truth assembled itself. Co-applicant, Mark Ellison. Primary borrower, Chloe Ellison Holt. Joint and several liability for full loan amount. My neat engineer's signature under hers. I'd read the line a dozen times back in 2021, but tonight it hit differently. That phrase wasn't just legalese, it was a lifeline I could still pull. 30 years of overtime, of skipping vacations so Chloe could go to college debt-free, all condensed into that red binder. The color wasn't accidental. I'd chosen it years ago to stand out among the blues and blacks. A warning to myself. These are the papers that matter. I used to joke that if the house ever caught fire, I'd grab 2 things, the photo albums and this binder. Now only one of them still felt worth saving. I clicked open my laptop and scrolled through a spreadsheet of payments I'd kept since the first mortgage. Every entry dated, rounded, categorized, control, that's what it looked like on paper. But somewhere between, Dad, can you co-sign, and get out of my house, control had turned into complicity. I'd let guilt run my life. When her mother died, I tried to make up for every absence with money and leniency. When she married Brandon, I told myself he just needed time to grow up. Each time I covered a missed payment or overlooked a late fee, I told myself I was helping. But maybe I wasn't helping at all. Maybe I'd been enabling polishing the armor of someone who was already stabbing holes in the hull. That thought hit like rebar to the ribs. I leaned back, rubbed my temples, and said it out loud, just to hear how it sounded in the room. Was I enabling their toxic behavior all this time by being too nice? The silence didn't argue. I opened the binder again, flipped to the tab labeled Legal Correspondence. There, stapled behind a property tax statement, was an old letter from the bank's attorney explaining co-ownership rights. If either party jeopardized the property, the co-signer could petition for protection, including forced sale or transfer of title. I'd skimmed it years ago, never thinking I'd need it. Tonight it read like a map out of the maze. I pulled my phone closer, scrolled through contacts until I found the number my neighbor Hank had once given me, Ava Delgado, attorney at law. I'd helped her inspect a cracked foundation on a job years back. She'd told me then, paperwork is just another kind of blueprint, Mark. You read it right, it'll tell you how to rebuild. I hadn't realized she was talking about more than houses. Before calling her, I opened a new note on my phone and started writing what I didn't want to forget. Boundary. No more emotional rescues. Every move documented. Goal. Protect the asset. Method. Legal, not emotional. The words steadied me. My pulse slowed. I realized how different this felt from the shouting match on Chloe's porch. There, I'd been the desperate parent begging for reason. Here, I was the co-owner assessing risk. Same man, different position. The clock read 11:47 p.m. I poured the last of the coffee and stared at the binder. Funny how something so simple, a stack of paper, could hold more power than 30 years of fatherly lectures. Brandon could twist stories, gaslight Chloe, play the victim online, but he couldn't argue with signatures and timestamps. Paper didn't flinch under emotional blackmail. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to calm. Not joy, not vengeance, just clarity. The kind you get when you stop trying to fix people and start fixing the problem. Tomorrow I'd call Ava. I'd find out exactly what leverage that clause gave me. Tonight, I'd let myself feel the smallest flicker of relief. The red binder sat under the lamp, edges glowing like a warning light, or maybe a signal flare. Either way, it was saying the same thing. Stop feeling guilty. Start fighting back. Monday mornings used to smell like coffee and steel dust. Now they smell like tension. I drove to the construction office where Brandon worked as a project estimator, same company I retired from, same building I helped design 20 years ago. I knew the security guard, the break room layout, the rhythm of the place. That familiarity made it easier to walk in like I belonged, even though technically I didn't anymore. I told myself I wasn't here to pick a fight. I was here for facts. But when someone's gambling debts are stapled to your mortgage, facts start to feel personal. Brandon was in the break room pouring sugar into his coffee like he was sweetening his conscience. When he looked up and saw me, the smirk flickered just long enough for me to see the panic behind it. "Mark," he said, like he was greeting a tax auditor. "You can't just show up here. This is harassment." "Relax," I said. "I'm not here to cause a scene. I just have something you need to see." I set my red binder on the table between us. The metallic thump of its clasp made the other guy in the room quietly leave. "Smart man," Brandon chuckled, but his hand twitched on his mug. "You carrying that thing everywhere now? What is this? Your emotional support binder?" I opened it to the section labeled credit lines and liens. "Bank statements," I said, sliding a few pages toward him. "A $53,000 debt secured against the house you live in. Late payments. Second mortgage applications. Ring a bell?" He didn't touch them. "You went through our accounts? That's illegal." "No," I said evenly. "It's legal when my name's on the loan. The bank called my house about missed payments. I didn't go looking for this, you dragged me into it." He took a shaky sip of coffee. "This doesn't concern you. That's the thing about liability," I said. "It concerns whoever's left holding the bag. And right now, that's me." He slammed the mug down, coffee splashing across the laminate table. "You think you can control us with your money? That's your problem, you don't know when to let go." "Control?" I laughed once, low. "I'm the one who spent 30 years earning what you're gambling away. That's not control, that's accountability." Brandon leaned closer, his cologne sharp enough to sting. "You don't know how this works, old man. I've got investments, crypto, side projects. It's all temporary debt. You wouldn't understand. Try me." He hesitated. I saw the flash of fear he couldn't hide. That told me more than the paperwork ever could. I took out my phone, tapped open the screenshots I'd saved, emails from AmeriHome Equity, Rapid Win Casino, and a Venmo transfer to someone named Big Jake Poker. I placed the phone face up on the table. "You're not investing," I said. "You're gambling online, under your wife's name, using the house as collateral." "That's fraud, Brandon." He lunged for the phone, but I pulled it back before he could grab it. His face flushed red, the kind of color people get when they realize they're cornered. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cracking. "I have a system. It's just off balance right now. I can fix it." "There's no fixing addiction with more denial," I said. "And gaslighting me doesn't change the math." He laughed, but it sounded hollow. "You're not family anymore, Mark. Chloe said you crossed every boundary. She doesn't want you in our lives." I studied him for a long moment. "That's convenient. You get caught lying, and suddenly boundaries matter." He stepped forward until his shadow cut across my binder. "Stay out of my business, or things will get ugly." "Ugly how?" I asked. He clenched his jaw, searching for courage he didn't really have. "You'll find out." I could smell the mix of sweat and cheap deodorant. He wanted to scare me, but all I felt was a slow burning calm, the kind that comes from knowing the truth and having the paperwork to prove it. "Let me be clear," I said. "You've already made it my business. Every loan you open, every dollar you lose, it's tied to my signature. If you drag Chloe down, you drag me too. So I'm not staying out, I'm cleaning up the mess you made." He snorted. "Good luck explaining that to her. She thinks you're trying to ruin her marriage." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe one day she'll realize I was trying to save her house. What their place is in the stuff in." I closed the binder, wiped the coffee off the cover with a napkin, and stood. "This was your warning. The next conversation we have will be through lawyers." "Well," he sneered, but there was sweat pooling under his collar. I could see it, the panic of a narcissist losing control. He wanted a fight. Something emotional he could twist into a new story where he was the victim and I was the bully. I wasn't giving him that. I walked out, binder under my arm, my phone buzzing with a new notification recording saved. Not bad for a first step. I didn't feel triumphant, just steady. The kind of steady you get after years of building foundations that don't crack under pressure. Brandon thought he could intimidate me into silence. What he didn't understand was that the moment I pressed record, I stopped being his target and became his consequence. The morning after the break room showdown, I sat in my truck for 10 full minutes outside a law office with a blue awning that read Delgado and Shue Property and Family Law. My coffee was already cold, but I wasn't here for caffeine. I was here for leverage. When I finally went inside, the place smelled like printer ink and eucalyptus. The receptionist recognized my name from the call I'd made late the night before and ushered me straight in. Ava Delgado stood to greet me, mid-30s. Sharp suit. Sharper eyes. She had the kind of calm that comes from watching 100 family implosions and knowing exactly where the cracks start. "Mark Ellison," she said, shaking my hand. "You built the Piermont Community Center, right? My dad still brags about that gym floor." I smiled out of habit. "Yeah. Strong foundations, good drainage." "Then you're already speaking my language." I told her everything, the binder, the debts, the confrontation. She listened without interrupting, just jotting notes in a slim black pad. When I finished, she tapped the pen twice on the desk. "You're not crazy, Mark. You're a co-owner of that property. If Brandon's borrowing against it without your consent, that's not family drama. That's breach of contract, and potentially fraud." The word fraud hit me like a leveler. It took something messy and emotional and pinned it to a statute. "So what can I actually do?" I asked. "First," she said, "we freeze the board. File a lis pendens, a legal notice that prevents them from refinancing, selling, or transferring the property until the dispute's resolved. Then we consider a partition action. That forces a sale if co-owners can't agree. You'd get your equity back. They'd have to face the consequences. Have you or friends that come?" I tried to picture Chloe packing boxes, Brandon spinning stories about the cruel father who sold their home. "I don't want to destroy her life," I said quietly. Ava tilted her head. "You're not destroying it. You're setting a boundary she's refused to acknowledge. You can't save someone who keeps choosing the fire." That word again, boundary. It sounded clinical when therapists said it, but in Ava's mouth, it had weight, structure. A blueprint term. She opened a folder and drew a quick flowchart. "You've got 3 options: confrontation, withdrawal, or control. You've tried the first 2. Time for the third." I nodded, half to her, half to myself. "You sound more like an engineer than a lawyer." She smiled. "Paperwork is just construction with Latin." For the first time in weeks, I almost laughed. Ava went on, outlining a timeline: 30 days for filing, 10 for notice, 90 for sale authorization. She'd seen this pattern before. The gambler who hides behind the spouse who hides behind family loyalty. While she talked, I realized she wasn't just strategizing. She was teaching me how to fight smart, how to replace guilt with process. "You'll need copies of every document," she said finally. "Mortgage, title, bank letters, texts, everything with timestamps. Emotion won't win this. Paper will. There is what of the create." "I've got it all," I said, tapping the red binder I'd brought. "I can tell," she said. "You're organized. That'll make my job easier. But Mark, this isn't just about money. This is about reclaiming agency. People like Brandon thrive when you doubt your own right to act. Don't give him that satisfaction." I left her office an hour later with a folder of legal forms and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Outside, the February wind bit through my jacket, but it didn't feel punishing. It felt clean. I sat in my truck, watching pedestrians hurry across the icy street, and thought about something Ava had said near the end of our meeting. "You built foundations for a living. Now you're reinforcing your own." I wasn't sure if that was legal advice or therapy, but it landed either way. Back home, I placed the binder in the center of the table, next to the new folder she'd given me. 2 colors, red and white, like warning and peace. For once, I could see a path that didn't depend on someone else's apology. Tomorrow we'd file the first motion. Tonight, I'd sleep, knowing I wasn't waiting for anyone to do the right thing anymore. I was building something stronger. Accountability. Hank Russo has been my neighbor for 20 years, the kind of guy who grills through snowstorms and tells the truth like it's his civic duty. If he thinks you're wrong, he won't debate you, he'll just hand you a beer, say it to your face, and wait for you to admit it. That's exactly what he did the day after I met with Ava Delgado. I was tightening the latch on my truck bed when Hank hollered from his porch. "You look like a man carrying a secret and a headache." "Coffee?" He didn't wait for an answer. 10 minutes later, I was sitting on his front steps with a chipped mug in my hands and his old Labrador sleeping between us. Hank squinted toward my house. "Heard your daughter's car wasn't in the driveway this weekend." "Trouble?" "You could say that," I said. "She told me to get out of her house. Said she'd call the police. He doin' Soldier." He let out a low whistle. "Jesus, what'd you do, kill her, dog?" "No," I said. "I found out her husband's gambling away their mortgage." Hank didn't blink. "And you co-signed?" "Yeah." He took a sip, then looked at me sideways. "Mark, you've always been the guy who fixes other people's cracks before your own foundation's dry. When are you gonna learn you can't pour concrete for someone who keeps digging holes?" I smiled, but it didn't reach. "You sound like my lawyer." "Good, maybe she's as blunt as me." I told him about Ava, about the lease pendants and the partition plan. He listened, nodding, but his eyes stayed on the horizon like he was watching a storm roll in. "So what's the holdup?" he asked finally. "You've got proof, you've got a plan. Why are you still sleeping in that big empty house, waiting for someone to set fire to it?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Habit. Guilt. Call it whatever you want. That place is full of memories. Feels like if I leave, I'm abandoning her completely." Hank set his mug down with a soft thud. "Buddy, she abandoned you the minute she chose denial over truth. You're not leaving her, you're leaving the version of her that can't face reality." His words hit harder than he probably realized. Because he was right. I'd built my life around the idea that loyalty fixes everything. It doesn't. Sometimes it just keeps the wound open. He leaned back, stretching his knees. "You ever think maybe you're the addict here?" I frowned. "Addict? Not to gambling," he said. "To guilt. To being the rescuer. You keep taking hits for everyone else because it makes you feel useful. You call it love, but it's just another form of enabling." I let that sit. It wasn't an insult, it was an X-ray. "I don't even know what it looks like to stop," I said. "It looks like packing your essentials, getting out of that mausoleum you call a house, and letting the chips fall. You've done your part. Let the system work for once." I watched the wind stir the frost on his lawn. Ava mentioned the same thing. Said I should create distance, at least while things heat up legally. "She's right," Hank said. "Brandon's the kind of narcissist who gets mean when he loses control. Don't give him a target. You've earned peace. Go find some." I nodded slowly. "There's a furnished studio near the courthouse, month-to-month lease." I was thinking about it. "Thinking about it?" He laughed. "Mark, for a man who built half this town, you sure overthink every nail when it's your own house." I smiled for real that time. "You're not wrong." He clapped my shoulder, heavy and warm. "Look, I've seen too many guys our age waste retirement cleaning up their kids' chaos. You can love her and still protect yourself. Those two things aren't opposites, they're boundaries." Boundaries. The word again. It was starting to sound less like a wall and more like a tool, something precise. Something measured. When I got home, I walked through every room slowly, touching the walls, the door frames, the places that once held meaning. The silence was thick but not cruel. It felt like the house was waiting for permission to rest. I packed one suitcase, clothes, toiletries, and the red binder. Everything else could stay. Before leaving, I stood in the living room, looking at the framed photo of Chloe at her college graduation, the one where she's holding her diploma and smiling at me like I hung the moon. I whispered, "I still love you, kid, but I'm done saving you." Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, and left the key under the stone planter where I used to hide her Easter candy. That night, in the small rented studio near downtown Haverford, I unpacked the bare essentials. The space was impersonal. White walls, laminate counters, but it was safe. And for the first time in months, I slept through the night without waiting for the phone to ring. The next morning, I woke up early, brewed cheap coffee, and wrote a single line in my notebook before heading to meet Ava for the filing. "Guilt built the prison. Boundaries are the door." Hattered another Pondim. "The courthouse in Haverford isn't grand, just brick and limestone. built in the 70s with the same stubborn practicality as the people who use it. Still, walking through those glass doors with Ava felt heavier than I expected. She carried her slim laptop bag. I carried the red binder, now swollen with labeled tabs and photocopies. Inside, everything smelled like toner and old carpet. A clerk with tired eyes took our forms while Ava double-checked each page. Partition petition, lease pendants, property description, mortgage documents, she murmured, sliding papers across the counter like a blackjack dealer. Every signature meant another step away from chaos. The clerk stamped the final page, 3 crisp punches of the rubber seal, and said, "Case number CV247925. It didn't sound like much, but to me, it was a declaration of boundaries in legal language. Outside, the February wind felt different. Not warm, but cleaner, like air after a storm. Ava smiled faintly. "Congratulations, Mark. You just filed the first real consequence of your life that isn't built on guilt." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I settled for a deep breath. "So what happens next?" "Service of process," she said. "They'll both be officially notified, Brandon and Chloe. Once that happens, they can't refinance, sell, or hide assets. The house is frozen until the court decides." "Frozen," I repeated. "That's a word I can live with." Back at my small studio, the heater buzzed like an old friend. I brewed coffee and opened my laptop to find 3 new text messages waiting, 1 from Chloe, 2 from Brandon. "Chloe, Dad, what's going on? Some guy from the courthouse called. Are you suing us? Please tell me this is a mistake. Brandon, you've lost it, old man. I told you to stay out. If you don't drop this, you'll regret it." Brandon again. "This is harassment. We'll get a restraining order if we have to." I stared at the screen for a long time, letting their words dissolve into the same static they'd always been. Then I turned off notifications. Ava had told me, silence is a strategy, not surrender. The next step was simple. Documentation. Every threat, every message, every call would be saved. Not for revenge, just for record. Emotion doesn't win in court, but timestamps do. I scanned the texts into a folder labeled Exhibit B, Communications, and synced everything to the cloud. The red binder sat next to me, but I realized it had become more than paper. It was discipline. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt the old reflex to defend myself, to argue, to fix things. Instead, I wrote the time down and archived it. Paper doesn't argue. That evening, Ava called to confirm the filing was live in the system. "Service should happen by Friday," she said. "A deputy will deliver the notices personally." "Do I have to be there?" I asked. "No, that's the point. Let the process speak for you." After we hung up, I walked around the small apartment, restless but steady. The walls were bare, but that emptiness felt honest. My old house had been filled with family photos and tension visual noise pretending to be comfort. Here, everything was stripped to what mattered. A table, a chair, a coffee mug, and control. At 9 p.m., Chloe tried calling again. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail. "Dad, please call me back. Brandon's furious. He says you're trying to steal our house. I know you're angry, but this isn't the way. Can we just talk?" Her voice cracked halfway through. For a second, I almost caved. Almost. But then I remembered what Hank had said, that guilt is just another addiction. The urge to fix her voice on that recording felt exactly like a relapse. Instead of replying, I wrote in my notebook, "A boundary without enforcement is just a suggestion." The next morning, Ava emailed me copies of the filed documents with the court's digital seal. I printed them out on heavy paper and slid them into the binder under a new tab. Filed actions. The pages felt crisp. Clean, no emotion. No apologies, just facts. By noon, Brandon started sending emails instead of texts. He must have realized I wasn't biting. The tone had shifted from threats to insults. "You think paperwork makes you powerful? You're pathetic. Chloe's ashamed of you." I forwarded everything to Ava and flagged them as evidence of harassment. She replied within 10 minutes. "Perfect. Keep collecting. Don't respond." Every ignored message made the silence stronger. It wasn't coldness, it was containment. For the first time, I was the one setting the rhythm instead of reacting to theirs. Later that night, I poured another cup of coffee and opened the binder one more time. The red cover gleamed under the lamplight. edges worn but solid. I ran my thumb along the seam, the same way I used to check a beam for cracks. Nothing loose, everything aligned. When you're an engineer, you learn that stability doesn't come from avoiding stress, it comes from distributing it correctly. I wasn't avoiding the fight anymore. I was letting the structure carry the weight. Friday arrived, and with it, the calm before the storm. Ava texted a single line. Notices served. Timeline starts today. I pictured the look on Brandon's face when a deputy handed him an envelope with both our names on it, his illusions of control stamped out by a system he couldn't bluff. I didn't celebrate. I just exhaled and closed the binder. Outside, the snow had started again, quiet and relentless. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like balance, cold, clean, and deserved. The first call came 2 days after the papers were served. I didn't answer. Then came the second, third, and fourth until my phone looked like a distress beacon blinking in the dark. I let them all go to voicemail. By the time Monday rolled around, I had 12 missed calls and 5 voice messages. The first one was Chloe. Her voice trembled between panic and denial. "Dad, what is this?" A sheriff came to the door with papers. "Brandon says you're trying to take the house. Please, this has to be some misunderstanding. Sever." Then came Brandon's message, loud, frantic, and dripping with entitlement. "You think you can scare me with legal crap? This is family business, old man. You don't drag family into court." The irony almost made me laugh. Family, he'd used the word like a shield after months of weaponizing it. I saved every voicemail, labeled each file by date, and sent them to Ava. She replied almost instantly, "Good. Don't engage. This is phase 2 panic and projection." She was right. That week, I became the villain in their version of events. Chloe posted some vague status online about people who pretend to help but only want control. Friends and relatives started calling me, asking what was going on. I kept my answers short. "It's a legal matter," I said. "Everything's documented." The less I said, the louder their stories got, and the quieter I felt inside. Not empty, just clear. Ava called on Wednesday to update me. "They haven't filed a response yet," she said. "Deadline's next Friday. If they ignore it, we'll move for a default judgment. Fastest way to resolution." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "They'll probably ignore it. Denial's their comfort zone." "Then let the clock run," she said. That night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Christmases, birthdays, Chloe's wedding day. The smile that looked so bright now felt rehearsed in retrospect. It hit me how long I'd been mistaking politeness for love. I used to believe patience could fix anything. Turns out, patience just gives toxic people more time to reload. By Friday, their silence was deafening. No filings, no lawyers, just texts that swung between threats and guilt trips. "Brandon, you're ruining your own daughter's life. Brandon, you'll die alone in that apartment. Chloe, please, just stop this. We can talk." Ava told me not to respond. I didn't. I spent that weekend pruning the potted plant by my window, a small citrus tree I'd brought from the old house. Its leaves were curling from the dry heat. But when I trimmed the dead ones, the stem straightened again. Boundaries, even for plants, I thought. Then Sunday brought something unexpected. Silence. No messages, no calls, no social media updates, just quiet. I should have felt peace, but it felt like the air before thunder. I was right. Monday morning, someone banged on my apartment door so hard that the hinges rattled. "Mark, open up," Brandon's voice. Low, slurred, desperate. I didn't move. Through the peephole, I saw him pacing the hallway, red-faced, breathing like a man on the edge. He slammed his hand against the door again. "You think this is over? You think you can take my house?" My phone was already recording. Ava had drilled that into me. Never engage without documentation. "Now, I'm not taking anything," I said through the door. "You made choices. The court's just catching up to them." He kicked the door once, not hard enough to break it, but enough to make the frame shudder. "You don't understand, you old bastard. You're destroying everything." There it was, the narcissist's mantra. "You're making me do this." "Leave," I said calmly, "or I'll call the police." He froze, then laughed, the sound jagged. "You'd do that to your daughter's husband?" "I'd do that to anyone threatening my safety." Another silence, then the sound of retreating footsteps. I waited 2 minutes before calling Ava. Exactly as we predicted, she said. He's spiraling. I'll file a protective notice first thing in the morning. Don't open the door for anyone. The next few days passed in uneasy quiet. When the sun hit my window at noon, I'd move the citrus plant to the light, check my emails, log every call in my notebook. My life had narrowed to essentials: evidence, self-care, and strategy. And strangely, it didn't feel small, it felt solid. On Thursday, Ava called again. They missed the deadline, she said. No response filed. The court will issue a default judgment next week. So it's really happening. It's really happening, she confirmed. Once the order's signed, we move to appraisal and sale. You'll get your equity back. She wasn't to sixing divri to a night. My piet and foring. I thanked her, but after hanging up, I just sat there, staring at the wall. It wasn't joy or even relief, it was exhaustion mixed with clarity. For the first time, my life wasn't a reaction to someone else's chaos. That evening, Chloe left one last voicemail. Dad, I know you think you're doing the right thing. Maybe you are. I just wish it didn't have to be like this. I wish you could remember that I'm still your daughter. I played it twice, then deleted it. Because remembering didn't mean surrendering. The next morning, I looked out the window and saw a moving truck parked outside my old neighborhood on the newsfeed of a mutual friend's post. Chloe and Brandon, boxes piled high, faces tight and pale. Justice didn't always look dramatic. Sometimes, it was just paperwork, quietly turning consequences into motion. I poured myself another cup of coffee, flipped to a new page in my notebook, and wrote one line in the margin. Peace isn't free, it's earned, one signed document at a time. When the official letter arrived from the courthouse, I didn't even open it right away. I knew what it said before reading the first line: judgment granted. I sat with the envelope for a long minute, feeling its weight, like holding a brick from a demolished house. You can't rebuild the old structure, but you can still use the pieces for something stronger. Ava called that afternoon. It's official, Mark. The court approved the partition sale. The property will be appraised next week, then listed. Once sold, your equity is released. I exhaled slowly. So, it's done. Not quite, she said. Now comes the emotional fallout. That's the part they don't warn you about in law school. She wasn't wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept looping back to the same image: Chloe standing in that kitchen years ago, helping me count mortgage payments by hand. She was 7 then, proud to write the numbers while I explained interest and principal. I'd thought I was teaching her independence. I guess I'd only taught her how far someone can fall when they trust the wrong person. By Friday, the realtor's sign was up. A bright white post with court-ordered sale printed across the top in bold red letters. Neighbors noticed. Some called to ask what happened. I just said, "It's complicated." But it wasn't. Not really. Actions have consequences. Brandon had gambled with other people's futures. Now those futures were being liquidated. I didn't drive by the house, though. I didn't need to. The memories were enough. Chloe laughing in the driveway, painting her room yellow, crying over her first heartbreak. That home had seen everything we'd built and everything we'd broken. Now it was evidence in a case file. Ava emailed the appraisal report the following week. $432,000. Fair market value, maybe even generous. She also forwarded 3 offers, all from cash buyers. The highest one came from a real estate firm that specialized in distressed properties. The irony wasn't lost on me. When I signed the final authorization, I felt nothing dramatic, no surge of revenge, no fireworks of justice. Just a quiet click of completion, like closing a door that had been left open too long. A week later, Ava called again. Sale finalized. After closing fees and debt clearance, your net is $78,000. Direct deposit confirmed. Thank you, I said, though what I really meant was thank you for teaching me how to stop apologizing for existing. After hanging up, I sat at the small table in my rented studio and opened the binder one last time. Every document was in order, every tab labeled, every page stamped. I ran my hand over the cover and thought about what Ava had said months ago. Paperwork is just construction with Latin. She was right. I hadn't torn my daughter's world apart, I'd just rebuilt the foundation she'd ignored. That weekend, I went to see Hank. He was grilling in his backyard, smoke curling up into the cold March air. When he saw me, he raised an eyebrow. So did the big bad legal machine finally settle down? It did, I said. The house sold. They're moving out. Hank handed me a beer. You look lighter. I am, I admitted. Not happy, exactly. But lighter. He nodded. That's what happens when you put the weight back where it belongs. See, Beloff. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the sound of the grill hissing. Then Hank said, You think she'll come around someday? Maybe, I said. But I'm not waiting on it. I spent too many years mistaking guilt for love. Boundaries are love with better math. He laughed, the kind of laugh that says you finally got it. The next morning, I drove out of Haverford for the first time in months. I stopped at a small cafe outside town, the kind of place with mismatched mugs and old music playing low. I pulled out my notebook and wrote a single line. Closure isn't about winning. It's about not letting the wrong story define you anymore. That line stayed with me all day. I drove past the old neighborhood not to see the house, but to say goodbye to the version of me who lived for everyone else's comfort. Through the trees, I caught a glimpse of the roofline. The realtor's sign was gone. A new family was moving and 2 kids running across the yard, laughter echoing against the siding I'd helped finance. It didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. Maybe because I finally understood that letting go doesn't mean losing. It means stopping the bleeding. When I got back home, I transferred half the settlement into a savings account and used the rest as a down payment on a quiet condo in a nearby retirement community. Nothing fancy, just a corner unit with good light and a garden view. The realtor said most residents were former teachers, engineers, and small business owners, people who'd worked hard, lost things, rebuilt. The first evening there, I unpacked my few belongings, brewed coffee, and placed the red binder on a shelf not as evidence, but as a reminder. Ava stopped by a few days later to drop off the final paperwork. We talked about the case, and before leaving, she hesitated at the door. You know, she said, I took this case because it reminded me of my mother. She lost her house to my father's gambling when I was 12. She never fought back. I wanted to see how the story looks when someone actually does. That caught me off guard. I didn't know what to say except, then, I'm glad we both got to change the ending. She smiled. You did more than that, Mark. You proved that accountability can be its own kind of mercy. After she left, I sat by the window as dusk settled over the golf course outside. The sky turned amber, the same color as the lights that used to glow in Chloe's kitchen. Somewhere out there, she was starting over, just like me. Maybe someday she'd call. Maybe she wouldn't. Either way, I wasn't angry anymore. I'd built something stronger than forgiveness. Peace. With the truth. I took a final sip of coffee and closed my notebook, the page still open to the line I'd written at the cafe. Beneath it, I added one more sentence. Sometimes justice isn't revenge, it's recovery. Then I turned off the light. For the first time in years, the dark didn't feel empty. It felt earned. 3 months passed before I saw Chloe again. It was late summer by then. The air thick with the sound of cicadas. The kind of heat that makes everything feel heavy. I'd settled into the condo, joined a morning walking group, even started teaching a workshop at the community center on home maintenance for retirees. I was learning to live without the constant background noise of crisis. Then one Sunday afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Chloe standing there, holding a paper bag that smelled like coffee and cinnamon rolls. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in spirit, like the world had finally caught up with her. Hi, Dad, she said softly. Can I come in? I stepped aside without answering. She walked in, setting the bag on the counter, glancing around the room like she was cataloging a life she hadn't been part of. Nice place, she said. Feels calm. It is, I said. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she blurted, Brandon left. He's in Arizona, chasing some online job that doesn't exist. I stayed in Jacksonville for a while, tried to find my footing, but her voice cracked. It just fell apart. I nodded slowly. I'm sorry to hear that. She laughed, but it was a tired laugh. You told me this would happen. I just didn't want to believe you. I didn't say I told you so. I'd learned that truth doesn't need a victory lap. I didn't come for money, she said quickly. I came because I finally understand what you were trying to do. You weren't punishing me. You were protecting what mattered. That sentence broke something in me, not in a painful way. More like a dam finally giving way to a steady current. I wasn't perfect, I admitted. I let guilt drive me for too long. I wanted to save you from everything, even from yourself. But that's not love. That's control wearing a halo. She wiped her eyes. I don't blame you for the house. We deserved to lose it. I was just too scared to face it. We sat at the kitchen table, the one I'd bought secondhand when I moved in. She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photo of us from years ago, her high school graduation, my arm around her, both of us smiling like the future was guaranteed. I kept this in my wallet the whole time, she said. Every time things got bad, I'd look at it and think, he warned me. And I didn't listen. I smiled faintly. That's the thing about warnings. They sound like noise until the world goes quiet. She laughed through her tears. You always talked like an engineer turning emotions into math. It's the only way I knew how to make sense of chaos, I said. She reached across the table, hesitating before touching my hand. Do you think we can start over? Starting over doesn't mean erasing the past, I said. It means building something on top of it that won't collapse the same way. She nodded, gripping my hand tighter. For the first time in years, I saw the little girl who used to follow me around with a toy hammer, pretending to fix what wasn't broken. We talked for hours about her job search, about therapy, about the way she'd started volunteering at a housing nonprofit in Jacksonville. They help families who lost homes because of bad loans, she said. Guess I know a thing or two about that now. There was pride in her voice, quiet but real. I realized then that maybe losing the house wasn't the tragedy I'd thought. Maybe it was the renovation she needed. When she got up to leave, the sun had dipped low enough to paint everything gold. She hugged me, and this time I didn't feel her pulling away too soon. I'll call next week, she said. No promises, just effort. Effort's enough, I said. After she left, I stood at the window watching her drive off. The world outside was humming with late-day life, kids riding bikes, a neighbor watering plants, a dog barking 2 streets over. Ordinary things, the kind you don't notice until chaos stops being your normal. I sat back down at the table, the photo still lying there. I turned it over. On the back, in her handwriting, she'd written, "Thank you for teaching me that love without accountability isn't love at all." I placed the photo inside the red binder, not under evidence or documents, but in a new section I labeled reconciliation. Maybe that binder had finally become what it was always meant to be. Not a record of war, but a blueprint for rebuilding. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about something Ava once said during the early days of the case. The real win isn't the judgment, it's the peace that follows when you stop chasing validation. She was right. I wasn't chasing anymore. I'd spent years trying to be the hero in everyone else's story. Now, I was content being the architect of my own. I fell asleep listening to the quiet hum of the air conditioner. The sound steady, predictable proof that not everything had to break to get your attention. And for the first time in a long time, I dreamed not about loss, but about balance. 2 hands holding a foundation level, perfectly aligned. 6 months after the sale closed, I stopped checking the court docket. The case was archived, the proceeds settled, and my bank balance no longer tied to anyone else's mistakes. For the first time in decades, my finances and my peace belonged entirely to me. The condo had started to feel like home. The walls were no longer bare. A few framed photos hung in clean symmetry, my father in his work boots, Chloe as a child in her Halloween astronaut suit, and one recent photo of us at a diner, smiling across pancakes and bad coffee. It wasn't forgiveness in a frame, but it was progress. I spent my mornings walking the golf path behind the complex, notebook in hand. The engineer in me never really retired. I still found comfort in documenting things, even if they were just thoughts now instead of blueprints. I wrote about stability, about boundaries, about what it means to stop apologizing for protecting your own foundation. Funny thing about building structures, you spend your whole life worrying they'll crumble. But sometimes, you're the structure that needed reinforcement. Every Thursday, I met Ava for lunch at a small Mexican restaurant near the courthouse. She always ordered iced tea. I always ordered black coffee. We'd talk about her latest cases, the chaos she was managing for clients who still thought love could overwrite liability. One day, halfway through her taco, she said, "You know, I still tell people about your case." I raised an eyebrow. "The guy who sued his daughter? The guy who stopped letting guilt define love," she corrected. "You'd be surprised how many people need to hear that." I smiled. If my disaster turned into a lesson, I guess that's something. She studied me for a moment, then said, "You ever think about writing it all down? Maybe not as a legal story. More like a survival manual." I laughed. "A manual for what? How to rebuild after emotional foreclosure? Have this 9. Exactly that," she said. "You have a way of explaining hard truths without bitterness. That's rare." The idea stuck with me. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, opened a fresh notebook, and wrote the title at the top of the page, Foundations. What buildings taught me about people. The first chapter started like this. Every house tells you how it was built. Every person does too. The trick is learning to read the cracks before they widen. I wrote for hours, long after the sun went down. Not out of regret, but out of clarity. Every sentence felt like mortar between bricks, slow, steady, permanent. Chloe called once a week now. Nothing dramatic, just small updates: her new job at the nonprofit, the community garden she'd joined, the cat she'd rescued named Willow. The conversations were cautious at first, then warmer, each one a small repair, not to the past, but to the bridge between us. One evening, she said something that stayed with me. "You know, Dad, I used to think strength meant never walking away. Now I think it means knowing when to." I smiled into the phone. "That's a lesson worth paying for." She laughed softly. We both paid enough. After we hung up, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the sunset burn orange against the horizon. The world felt smaller but sharper, like a blueprint finally drawn to scale. I thought about all the people I'd met in my life, the gamblers, the pleasers, the fixers, the ones who built their houses on sand and blamed the tide when it washed away. I'd been one of them once, always reinforcing everyone else's foundation, while mine quietly cracked beneath me. But the cracks had taught me something essential: that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the decision to stop living inside someone else's storm. Ava's words echoed in my mind. You didn't just win a case, you reclaimed authorship. She was right. I'd stopped being a supporting character in someone else's drama. I'd taken the pen back. Weeks later, I drove out to a construction site on the edge of town, where they were laying new foundations for a housing project. The air smelled like wet cement and diesel, my kind of perfume. A younger foreman spotted me watching and asked, "You used to be in the business, didn't you?" "Still am," I said with a smile. "Just building something different these days." He laughed, not knowing how true that was. As I drove home, I thought about legacy, not the money, not the property, but the lessons that survive you. I used to think my greatest achievement was the house I built for my family. Now I knew it was the courage to let that house go when it became a monument to denial. Back at the condo, I opened the red binder one last time. The papers inside were crisp, untouched for months. On the final page, I added a new sheet, a short note, written in neat, deliberate script. Case closed. Foundation secured. Lessons transferred. I slid it into the back pocket, closed the binder, and placed it on the shelf beside my notebook. No more evidence to collect. No more battles to document. Just structure. Stability. Before bed, I looked out the window at the golf course lights flickering in the distance. Somewhere beyond that horizon, Chloe was learning her own version of balance. Maybe someday, when she builds again, whether a home, a marriage, or just herself, she'll remember what I told her when she was 7. A strong foundation isn't about what you build on top. It's about what you refuse to compromise underneath. And maybe, in her own way, she already has. I turned off the lamp, the room sinking into a comfortable dark. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, steady and sure, reminding me of everything I'd rebuilt, not from vengeance, but from truth. The house was gone. The story was over. But the foundation, it still held. A year later, almost to the day, I stood in front of the old property again. Not out of nostalgia, but curiosity. The new owners had done some remodeling, a fresh coat of blue-gray paint, new shutters, a trimmed lawn. The place looked alive again, like it had shaken off years of tension and started breathing on its own. I parked across the street and watched a father unload groceries from his car, while 2 kids chased each other up the driveway. Their laughter carried across the yard, bright and unburdened. For a second, I could almost hear Chloe's voice at that age, her little sneakers thumping against the same concrete. It didn't hurt, not anymore. It just felt complete. I wasn't here to mourn what was lost. I was here to acknowledge what had survived. People think revenge stories end with fireworks, someone humiliated, someone vindicated. But real life isn't cinematic. Justice doesn't roar, it settles. It shows up quietly, disguised as peace of mind. When all this began, I thought my story was about betrayal, about a daughter choosing a liar over her father. But standing there, I realized it was never about that. It was about patterns, about how love without accountability turns into debt, emotional, financial, spiritual, and how sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let the foreclosure happen. I used to believe boundaries were walls. Now I know they're scaffolds. They don't keep people out, they keep you upright while you rebuild. That lesson didn't come easy. It cost me a house, a few years of resentment, and more nights than I can count staring at documents I once thought represented failure. But those papers, the contracts, the filings, the stamps, they taught me something far more valuable than any property ever could. That clarity is its own kind of home. A few weeks back, Ava invited me to speak at a legal ethics seminar. She said, "You're living proof that doing the hard thing can also be the right thing." I didn't know what to say at first. I wasn't a lawyer or a scholar. I was just a man who finally got tired of being quiet, while other people mistook my silence for consent. When I stood in front of that small audience, mostly young attorneys with laptops and caffeine eyes, I didn't lecture them about law or morality. I told them about the night I packed my suitcase and left the house I'd built from the ground up. I told them how it felt to choose self-respect over sentiment, how every man or woman will face a moment where doing what's right feels like betrayal until time reveals it as liberation. After the talk, a woman approached me, maybe in her 30s, eyes red-rimmed but steady. She said, "My father's going through something similar. He keeps asking if fighting back makes him a bad person. What should I tell him?" I didn't hesitate. "Tell him this," I said. "Bad people break things. Good people stop pretending the cracks aren't there." That line followed me home like a mantra. I wrote it in my notebook that night, under a new heading. What the house taught me. K. Never confuse keeping the peace with keeping yourself small. The truth doesn't destroy families, denial does. Sometimes, the person you have to protect your child from is the person they love most. You can forgive without reopening the door. And above all, when the foundation shifts, rebuild, don't retreat. The next morning, I got an email from Chloe with a photo attached. She was standing in front of a small duplex, holding a set of keys. The caption read, "My first home. Bought it on my own this time. Inspected the foundation twice." I stared at that picture for a long time. The pride I felt wasn't loud, it was steady, like the slow settling of concrete after a storm. She'd learned. Not because I saved her, but because I stopped saving her. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee. The same brand I'd been drinking since the day this all started. The air was cool. The sky sharp with stars. I thought about how many years I'd spent trying to control outcomes instead of mastering endurance. We all want happy endings. But what I got was better, a truthful one. A life recalibrated, rebuilt, reinforced. The kind of ending that doesn't close a door, but keeps it open just enough for light to pass through. In the distance, thunder rumbled, soft and low. Rain was coming. I didn't rush to go inside. I'd learned long ago that a good structure doesn't fear weather. It bends, absorbs, and settles deeper into the earth. That's how you know the foundation holds. I raised my mug in a quiet toast to Ava, to Hank, to Chloe, and to the man I finally became. Then I whispered something I hadn't said out loud since this all began. I'm home. It's strange how peace sneaks up on you. It doesn't arrive with trumpets or a perfect morning, it slips in quietly. One ordinary day at a time, until you realize the chaos you used to breathe has gone stale without you. A year and a half after everything ended, I started volunteering at a vocational center downtown. They ran workshops for young adults learning practical trades, plumbing, construction, electrical, the kind of work that teaches you cause and effect in the most literal way. Pour the foundation wrong, and the whole house leans. Forget the wiring path, and the lights never come on. They asked me to teach a short course called Foundations and Integrity. Not the legal kind, not the emotional kind, just the physical kind. But of course, those things overlap more than most people realize. On the first day, one of the students, a kid barely 20, asked why I cared so much about the way rebar was spaced in concrete. I smiled and said, "Because invisible mistakes become visible eventually." He didn't get it then. I didn't expect him to. After class, I sat in my truck watching the students leave, their laughter spilling out like a soundtrack for second chances. I thought about how long it had taken me to stop confusing being needed with being loved. That was my invisible mistake, the one that took decades to crack open. Chloe visited once a month now. Sometimes she'd bring Willow, the cat. Sometimes she'd come alone. She'd found stability, a new job, a circle of friends who valued honesty over performance. She looked grounded, like someone who had built her life from bedrock instead of promises. Last time she came by, she brought a small plant in a clay pot. "It's a cutting from my new garden," she said, setting it on the counter. "Figured your place could use a little life." I smiled. "It's perfect. What is it?" "Lemon tree," she said, "just like the one you used to grow." That caught me off guard. I remembered the citrus tree I'd left behind when I moved out of the old house. I'd pruned it before I left, thinking it might die without care. Maybe this was the universe's way of returning it smaller, but alive. Later that evening, I moved the pot to the window where the light was strongest. The leaves caught the sun, glowing almost gold. Growth never announces itself, it just keeps reaching upward, quietly. I poured myself a drink and sat by the window, flipping through my old red binder for the last time. The edges were worn now, the spine soft from use. The documents inside had become historical artifacts. Court orders, receipts, correspondences, proof of a war I no longer needed to remember to believe it happened. I closed it, not with ceremony but with gratitude. That binder had started as my shield, cold, methodical, unyielding. Now it was just paper. The real foundation I'd built wasn't in those pages. It was in learning to live without them. A few weeks later, Ava stopped by the vocational center to give a talk on property law. We hadn't seen each other in months, but the moment she spotted me in the crowd, she smiled like no time had passed. Afterward, we grabbed coffee and talked about her latest cases, inheritance disputes, broken contracts, the usual circus of human entitlement. "Still fighting the good fight?" I asked. "Still trying," she said, "though I've started referring certain cases to therapists before clients even get to court. Things might graph. In mine." We both laughed, but she wasn't joking. Before we parted, she handed me an envelope. "From the state bar," she said. "They're recognizing your case as a study in ethical boundary enforcement. It's being added to the legal ethics curriculum next semester." I blinked. "You're kidding." "Nope," she said. "You're officially a case study now." We both laughed again, but this time it felt full circle. That night, I went home and added the letter to the binder, not as evidence, but as an epilogue. The story had found its own symmetry. As I sat by the window, the air warm and faintly citrus-scented from Chloe's plant, I realized that what I'd built wasn't revenge or even redemption. It was resilience. The kind that doesn't depend on apologies or validation, only on knowing you didn't abandon yourself when it mattered most. People ask what closure feels like. They expect me to describe relief, maybe triumph. But closure isn't about winning. It's about no longer needing to. Sometimes it's as simple as breathing in the quiet of your own space and realizing you've outgrown the noise. The next morning, I found the lemon tree blooming, tiny white flowers opening under the early sun. I touched one gently, surprised by how strong the stem felt beneath my fingers. It didn't need a perfect environment, just steady light and time. I guess that's true for people too. Before heading to class, I jotted one last note in my notebook, a line that felt like the right ending for everything that came before. Foundations don't last because they're flawless. They last because someone keeps showing up to reinforce them. I closed the notebook, grabbed my coffee, and walked out the door. No speeches, no nostalgia, no ghosts left to fight, just a quiet morning, a blooming tree, and the simple rhythm of a life finally built on level ground. If this story taught me anything, it's that self-respect isn't selfish, it's survival. I used to think setting boundaries made me cold, that saying no meant I was shutting people out. But the truth is, boundaries aren't walls, they're doors you choose when to open. Every time I let guilt dictate my choices, I handed over a piece of my peace. Taking it back wasn't revenge, it was recovery. The biggest lesson I learned is that no is a complete sentence. You don't owe anyone an explanation for protecting your mental health, your home, or your sanity. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away quietly and let the consequences do the talking. Healing doesn't mean forgiving the pain, it means refusing to keep bleeding from the same wound. I learned that family isn't defined by shared DNA or last names, it's defined by respect. And sometimes, you have to let people lose access to you so they can finally face the weight of their own actions. saying, enough isn't cruelty, it's closure. So yeah, maybe I wasn't the hero in their story, but I finally became the main character in mine. And for the first time, that feels like enough. Now I'm curious, what about you? Have you ever had to cut ties with a toxic relative or stand your ground when everyone told you to keep the peace? How did you protect your sanity without losing yourself? Share your story below. I'd really like to hear how you handled it.